Ethan Whitmore had never touched a woman. Not romantically, not intimately, not even the accidental brush of fingers during a handshake. At 28, he was the youngest tech billionaire in America, a white man with piercing blue eyes and a name that echoed through Forbes and Wall Street Journal covers. But for all his wealth and prestige, he couldn't muster the courage to meet a woman's eyes, let alone hold her hand. He didn't date. He didn't flirt. He didn't go out. Most days, he didn't even leave his penthouse. And yet on a cold February evening, as snow tapped gently against the 32nd floor windows of his Central Park West residence, a stranger was on her way to his door, sent by his parents armed with a legally binding contract and a single life-altering purpose to give him a child. The document had been sitting on his mahogany desk for 2 weeks. Ethan had skimmed it the night it arrived, his hands trembling as he read the clinical language. Surrogate Services Agreement for the purpose of producing an heir to the Whitmore family estate. A chill had settled in his spine the moment he saw the word heir. His parents hadn't even pretended anymore. They had bypassed his discomfort, ignored his repeated pleas for more time, and arranged everything while they were abroad, expanding their empire across Europe. Ethan had thought the software launch last month was the only thing requiring his full attention. He was wrong. Now, as the soft chime of his private elevator echoed through the penthouse, Ethan froze. His mind screamed for him to move, but his body remained rooted in place, fingers curled tightly around a ceramic coffee mug. His sanctuary, once filled with quiet hums of servers and the blue glow of monitors, had become a war zone. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered across the marble floor. A sharp damn escaped his lips, rough and unfamiliar. It was the first word he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. Ever since his parents left, Ethan had spoken to no one in person. All meetings had been virtual. His team ran the company with precision automation, humming like a heartbeat in the background of his sterile, isolated world. Another chime, then the gentle hiss of the elevator doors opening. He stepped back into the shadows of his home office chest, tightening as soft footsteps echoed across the foyer. Feminine, graceful, measured. The concierge was supposed to announce all visitors. That was protocol. But the contract had included override codes, and his parents, ever the strategists, had prepared for every obstacle. Then came the voice. "Mr. Whitmore," she called out. It was warm, velvet-laced with honey. There was nervousness in it, too, just enough tremble to make her sound real. Human. "I'm Amara Johnson. I believe your parents arranged for me to come." Ethan's breath caught. The name from the contract. Amara, graduate student, literature major, Columbia University, no criminal record. Financial need critical. Mother terminally ill. All documented in the contract. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the office wall as if it could absorb him. This wasn't happening. He wasn't ready. His therapist had warned him this day might come, the day his parents stopped accepting excuses and started forcing action. But he'd imagined legal notices, heated arguments. Not this. Not a woman standing in his foyer, gentle voice echoing through his carefully curated solitude. "Mr. Whitmore," she tried again, closer now. "I know this is awkward, but maybe we could talk. I drove all the way from Brooklyn. In this storm." The sincerity in her voice pulled at something in his chest. Against his better judgment, he stepped quietly toward the cracked door of his office and peered through it. And there she was. Amara Johnson stood in the marble foyer like someone who didn't belong, not because she was out of place, but because she brought too much life into the cold, sterile space. Her skin glowed like rich mahogany under the recessed lighting. Her natural curls framed her face with elegance, high cheekbones, casting soft shadows, lips full, but tight with uncertainty. She wore a simple black dress and held a manila folder in one hand, her coat still damp from the snow. Ethan's throat closed up. She was breathtaking, but more than that, she was real. Not a spreadsheet or a voice on a screen, not an idea, not a contract, a human being standing in his home waiting for him. "I know you're here," she said softly, setting her purse on the glass coffee table. "Your parents explained that you're shy. I want you to know I'm not here to judge you or pressure you into anything you're not comfortable with." He pressed himself harder into the wall, his mind racing. How was he supposed to speak to her? Look at her. Explain that he, a man with hundreds of employees and a $500 million fortune, had never even kissed someone. He caught his reflection in the darkened window, tousled hair, tired eyes, a Harvard t-shirt and jeans that hadn't seen the light of day in a week. He looked like a man halfway between genius and ghost. I have the contract here, Amara continued, opening the folder. It specifies a 6-month arrangement with expectations, but honestly, I'd rather just talk first. Get to know each other. We don't have to rush anything. She glanced around the room, taking in the minimalist design, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive furniture that had never been touched. Her expression wasn't judgmental. It was curious, kind. I studied literature at Columbia, she said, as if they were already mid-conversation. I love books, rainy afternoons, terrible romantic comedies. I'm probably the last person in New York who still keeps a paper journal. Despite his fear, Ethan found himself leaning closer to the door crack. Her voice was comforting, safe. I'm also broke, she added with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. My mom has stage 3 cancer and the medical bills are drowning us. This contract could save her life. That's the only reason I'm here, Mr. Whitmore. Not because I'm some kind of professional. That honesty struck him like lightning. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She was here because she had to be, just like he was hiding because he didn't know how not to. For the first time, he stepped away from the wall. His voice caught in his throat. Miss Johnson, he whispered. Amara turned surprised, and her expression bloomed into something radiant relief, maybe even pleasure. There you are, she said warmly. Please, call me Amara. Ethan didn't step all the way out of the shadows. Not yet. He lingered in the doorway, fingers curled tightly around the frame, as though it might keep him upright. His mouth had gone dry and his palms were damp, despite the cool air drifting from the marble floors. His heart pounded in a wild, erratic rhythm as he stared at the woman standing just a few feet away. She stood so still, waiting for him to say something more, her eyes wide and kind but uncertain. Her presence filled the room without trying. She didn't demand his attention, she simply had it. He stammered and then cleared his throat. This is terrifying. Amara's lips curved into a soft smile. For both of us. She said it with such warmth, such unpretentious honesty, that the tightness in Ethan's chest loosened just a little. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was thick with tension, yes, but not hostile. She hadn't moved toward him, hadn't tried to touch him. She simply stood there steady and patient. I know I'm here under unusual circumstances, she said gently, but I don't want to start this off like a transaction. I'd rather start as people. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her clarity. He had prepared for awkward silences, cold professionalism, maybe even resentment. But not this. I don't really know how to do this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Conversation, meeting people, even just standing in the same room. Amara tilted her head slightly. Then we can sit instead, she offered. No pressure. He hesitated, then gave a small nervous nod and slowly stepped into the living room. It felt like walking across a tightrope over a canyon. Every movement was deliberate, every breath shallow. He perched stiffly on the far end of the couch, while Amara took the armchair across from him, folding her hands in her lap. I like your apartment, she said after a moment, glancing around. It's very you. He raised an eyebrow. You don't know me. She grinned. Exactly, that's why it works. It tells me just enough without revealing too much. Controlled, precise, minimalist. Ethan managed the ghost of a smile, also cold and empty. Only until someone moves in who likes throw pillows and indoor plants. That drew a real if quiet laugh from him. Amara leaned back in her chair, studying him without scrutiny. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Why didn't you send me away? He looked down at his hands, flexing them once. I thought about it. For 3 hours. I sat here staring at the contract, trying to figure out how to cancel the whole thing. But then I kept hearing your voice, and I realized I wanted to hear it again. The words surprised even him. They came out more freely than he expected, like water breaking through a dam. Amara's gaze softened. That's probably the nicest thing anyone's said to me in months. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. A flicker of discomfort crossed his features. This might sound ridiculous, but you have a beautiful voice. It's calm and kind. Like it belongs in a different world than this. She tilted her head. A different world. Yeah, he said, gesturing vaguely to the tall windows, the stark white walls, the sleek lines of his designer furniture. One that doesn't have walls like mine. There it was, the truth. Walls. They weren't just architectural. They were internal, woven deep into the structure of who he was. Fortified by years of avoidance therapy that barely scratched the surface in the ever-present expectation that he perform, achieve, and behave according to his family's brand. And yet, this woman had walked through the front door and already made the walls tremble. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "I know this wasn't your choice, and I don't blame you for the awkwardness. If our places were reversed, I'd probably be hiding in a closet." Ethan looked up startled. "You would?" She chuckled. "I'm a grad student, not a saint. I'd have burned the contract, blocked your parents, and eaten a whole cheesecake by myself." That made him laugh, really laugh. The sound startled him. It startled her too, but then her smile widened like she'd been waiting for it. "I don't know how to do this either, Ethan," she said after a beat, "but I do know how to listen. And I'm not here to judge you. Not for your fear, not for your hesitation, definitely not for your silence." He swallowed hard. "Why did you say yes to this to them?" Amara exhaled slowly. "Because I love someone who's dying." There it was laid bare, no theatrics. "My mom's been everything to me. She raised me on her own, taught me how to fight without losing my softness. She's worked 3 jobs, skipped doctor visits to pay for my tuition, and now the cancer's winning. This arrangement gives me a shot to save her. And before you ask, no, I'm not proud of saying yes, but I don't regret it either." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked away, blinking hard. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she replied gently. "You didn't cause it." There was silence again, but it wasn't heavy. It was mutual. Like both of them were processing too much too fast. "I used to write music," Ethan said suddenly. Amara looked at him with interest. "Used to," stopped when the pressure of running a billion-dollar company made it feel childish. He paused. "But sometimes I still play. When I can't sleep. I'd love to hear it sometime." He nodded, unsure how to respond. Then he stood abruptly, the movement surprising them both. "Do you want some tea or water? I have not much else." Amara smiled and rose from the chair. Tea would be perfect. As he moved toward the kitchen, he realized something strange. His hands were still shaking, yes, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of the person in the room with him. Not because she didn't expect anything of him, but because she understood. The kettle whistled sharply, snapping Ethan from his spiraling thoughts. He turned off the stove and reached for 2 mugs, white identical, unused. Like most things in his kitchen, they were pristine, more for decoration than function. It wasn't that he didn't like food, he just didn't trust himself to prepare it properly. Meals had always been about survival, not comfort, and never, not once, about sharing. But now he wasn't alone. Behind him, Amara leaned lightly against the counter, studying the space with curiosity rather than judgment. Her presence filled the kitchen without making a sound. She hadn't spoken in several minutes, and Ethan was grateful for that. Not because her voice wasn't welcome, it was, but because the silence felt different with her. Not empty, just calm. "I'm guessing you don't cook much," she said finally, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she opened a drawer and pulled out a spoon. He exhaled a sheepish laugh. "That obvious." Amara glanced around the spotless counters and glass jars that looked like they'd never been opened. "Let's just say your olive oil is still sealed with plastic." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Guilty. I usually order in." She took a mug from his hand and dropped in a tea bag. "Mind if I check your fridge?" He hesitated. "You're not going to find much." "That's okay. I'm good at making something out of nothing." She walked to the refrigerator and opened the door. A soft blue light spilled out, revealing rows of bottled water, prepackaged salads, almond milk, and a suspiciously large number of protein shakes. Amara raised an eyebrow and turned toward him. "Ethan, be honest. When was the last time you ate a home-cooked meal?" He shrugged. "I think my assistant sent me soup once when I had the flu last winter." She gave him a look that was half amused, half horrified. "That doesn't count." He chuckled under his breath. "Then, probably not since college. And even then, it was more like reheated leftovers from the dining hall." Amara shook her head. "Tragic. Sorry to disappoint." "Oh, you didn't disappoint. You just gave me a project." She pushed the refrigerator door closed and turned to face him. "All right, chef. Let's see what we can scavenge." Before he could protest, she rolled up the sleeves of her cardigan, tied her curls back into a loose bun with an elastic from her wrist, and started moving confidently through the kitchen. She opened cabinets, checked drawers, inspected dry goods. Ethan stood there, stunned, watching as she took command of a space he hadn't really lived in. Garlic powder, canned beans, quinoa, frozen spinach. Not bad. You've got enough here to make something edible. He laughed. That's a generous word for what's in this apartment. She smirked. Watch and learn. Without asking, she handed him a cutting board and a knife. You're going to dice this onion, carefully. He looked at the onion in his hand like it might explode. I haven't done this in ever. Amara leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Then today's your debut. She showed him how to hold the knife, how to keep his fingers curled inward, how to slice through the onion without crushing it. Her instructions were gentle but firm, and she never once laughed at his clumsy attempts. Ethan's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from concentration. Still, there was something oddly satisfying about the process. It was manual, grounding, honest. By the time the onion was in a neat pile on the cutting board, Amara was sautéing garlic and spices in a pan, filling the kitchen with warmth and scent. This smells incredible, he said quietly. Amara smiled over her shoulder. It's not fancy, but it's real. He stood beside her close, but not too close, watching as she stirred the mixture with practiced ease. She moved with grace and confidence like she belonged in this space, even though she'd only arrived an hour ago. And something about that unnerved him. Not in a bad way. In a way that whispered, careful, she might change everything. You're comfortable here, he murmured before he realized he was speaking aloud. She glanced at him curious. Does that bother you? No, it's just strange. I've lived here for 5 years, and I've never seen this kitchen come alive like this. Amara didn't answer right away. She finished stirring, turned down the heat, and faced him. Ethan, can I ask you something personal? He nodded slowly. Is this really what you want? He blinked. The contract. She nodded. All of it. The arrangement. Me. A baby. Do you actually want this, or are you just trying to be what they want you to be? The directness of the question hit him harder than he expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I don't know, he said honestly. I've spent so long trying to meet expectations that I don't know where theirs end and mine begin. I didn't even read the full contract. I couldn't bring myself to. Amara's expression softened. Then maybe we don't start with the contract. Maybe we start with a meal, a conversation, a connection, and let the rest unfold. He nodded, grateful and terrified all at once. They ate in the dining nook overlooking the skyline. The dish she'd made was simple spiced beans, sautéed spinach, and fluffy quinoa, but to Ethan it tasted like a revelation, like something warm had cracked open inside him. They talked about books, music, childhood memories. She told him about growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, about her mother's poetry readings, about long subway rides with used paperbacks and headphones. He told her about his father's cold silence, about cello lessons he hated, about building his first app in a closet because his parents thought coding was a waste of time. By the end of the night, Ethan was still afraid, but he wasn't hiding anymore. 3 days passed. Ethan wasn't sure when the shift occurred, only that one morning it no longer felt strange to find Amara humming in his kitchen. She didn't ask permission to play his vinyl records or leave a book open on the coffee table. She didn't tiptoe. She simply lived gently, confidently, and for the first time, someone else's presence didn't feel like an invasion. It felt like possibility. Still, he kept his distance. He didn't know how to be close, not really. Proximity was something he'd studied, not experienced. With Amara, every accidental brush of hands felt like a live wire. Every laugh they shared seemed to echo longer than it should. And yet he hadn't touched her. Not once, not even a handshake. So when he woke up on the 4th morning to silence, he knew something was wrong. The usual soft sounds, the click of cabinets, the kettle whistling, the low hum of her voice as she skimmed pages of a novel were absent. A strange stillness hung over the penthouse. Ethan sat up, heart hammering in his chest, and listened. Then came the cough. It echoed from the kitchen, deep, ragged, painful. He was out of bed before he could think. Ethan found her slumped over the sink, one hand braced on the counter, the other clutching her stomach. She was still in her sleepwear, a cotton t-shirt and pajama pants, but her skin glistened with sweat and her shoulders trembled with every breath. Amara, he said, crossing the floor in seconds. She looked up and his stomach dropped. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Her cheeks flushed, unnaturally red. She tried to straighten, but another violent cough doubled her over, leaving her gasping for air. I'm okay, she whispered. Just a cold. No, Ethan said firmly. You're burning up. Without thinking, he reached forward and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. She was on fire. The touch only lasted a second, but it changed everything. His skin against hers, no panic, no shame, no retreat, just instinct, protective, necessary. She swayed again and he caught her. Come on, he said, his voice steady even as his heart raced. You're going to bed. Amara tried to protest, but she was too weak. Her head dropped against his shoulder as he guided her carefully down the hall. The way she leaned into him, trusting unguarded, tightened something deep in his chest. In the guest room, he helped her under the covers, adjusting the blankets when she started shivering, despite the heat radiating off her skin. Her breaths were shallow, her lips pale. I'll be right back, he promised. He sprinted to the bathroom, rummaged through his meticulously organized medicine cabinet, and returned with a thermometer, fever reducer, and a glass of water. 102.3. His jaw clenched. You should be in a hospital, he said, already reaching for his phone. Amara opened her eyes, weak but defiant. No emergency room, she rasped. I can't afford it. The words hit him like a slap. Amara, I know you can, she said softly, cutting him off. But I need to do this without turning into someone who takes and takes. Please. He wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at him to override her resistance. But something in her expression, a quiet pride, a trembling dignity, made him pause. Okay, he said finally, then I'll take care of you here. She blinked, surprised. You don't have to. I want to. And it was true, more than true. He needed to. For the next 24 hours, Ethan barely left her side. He worked from a laptop propped on the edge of the nightstand, checking her fever hourly, coaxing her to sip water, changing her damp clothes when the sweat soaked through. He Googled home care steps, obsessively afraid to sleep in case her breathing changed. When she was awake, he read to her favorite poems, passages from the books she left scattered throughout his apartment. His voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each line. It felt strange, this vulnerability. And yet it made sense. With Amara, everything was beginning to. Late on the second night, her fever spiked higher. He sat by the bed, wringing out a cool washcloth, panic clawing at his chest. She mumbled incoherently something about her mother, about missing a class, about failing someone. Hey, he whispered, dabbing her forehead. You're not failing anyone. You're safe. Her lashes fluttered. Don't go! Her hand reached blindly across the bed, searching. Without hesitation, Ethan took it. It was the first time she'd touched him. Her fingers curled around his like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'm here, he murmured, anchoring her hand between both of his. She sighed and her breathing slowed. The tension in her body eased, and within minutes she was asleep again, her grip softening, but Ethan didn't let go. He sat there until dawn, holding her hand, watching her sleep. It was only in the soft light of morning that he realized something monumental had changed. He wasn't afraid of her touch. He was afraid of losing it. By the end of the third day, the fever broke. Amara stirred to the sound of gentle pages turning and soft jazz playing from the corner speaker. Her body still ached, but the fog had lifted. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Ethan sitting by the window, one leg tucked under the other, a worn paperback in hand. He was reading aloud. His voice, deep and careful, spilled through the room in waves, each sentence delivered as though he were touching the words. Not just saying them, feeling them. It took her a moment to recognize the book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, a copy she'd left on the kitchen counter a week ago. She hadn't imagined he'd touch it, let alone read it. And now here he was, halfway through chapter 5, narrating like it mattered. Amara shifted slightly and the sound made him pause. His head turned immediately. When their eyes met, he offered a quiet smile. You're awake. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. He reached for the glass of water on the nightstand and held it out with both hands as if it were something sacred. She took it, sipping slowly, watching him over the rim. You read while I was sleeping, she managed to ask, voice hoarse. I figured, if I read it to you, maybe you'd wake up sooner. She raised an eyebrow. That's a bold strategy. It worked. Her laugh was raspy but real. It settled between them like sunlight on frost. He stood and adjusted the blanket over her legs. You scared me, he admitted softly. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't leave. You didn't, she said. I remember your voice and your hand. A faint color rose in his cheeks. I hope that was okay, he said. She nodded. It was. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, even a little tender. Ethan sat back in the chair beside her and picked up the book again. I didn't mean to snoop, he said, but your handwriting is all over this. Notes in the margins, underlines, stars. You basically rewrote the whole novel. Amara gave a small smile. That book saved me during a really rough year. I was failing classes, my mom was getting worse, and everything felt like it was caving in. But Janie, the protagonist, she kept chasing her voice, her truth. And I kept thinking maybe I could too. He looked at her for a long moment. It's beautiful, he said. Not just the story, but your voice inside it. She blinked, caught off guard. You read my notes? I couldn't help it. Some of them are better than the original lines. She gave a playful scoff. Zora Neale Hurston would rise from the grave to slap you. I deserve it, he said, grinning. But still, your thoughts, they made the book richer, more human. Amara sank deeper into the pillow's warmth, spreading through her chest, not just from the compliment, but from the sincerity behind it. You know, she said, I never read anything I didn't annotate. I guess I was always looking for someone to talk back. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Then maybe that's what we are, he said quietly. Footnotes in each other's stories. The room stilled. Neither of them moved. There was something reverent in the way he looked at her then, not as a stranger fulfilling a contract, not as a woman temporarily under his roof, but as someone whose soul had begun to echo inside his own. I don't know how this is supposed to go, he admitted, but I'd like to keep reading with you. If that's something you'd want. Her throat tightened. Yeah, she said, I'd like that. The next few days unfolded gently like pages turned with care. Amara recovered slowly with Ethan always nearby, reading in the afternoons, making scrambled eggs in the morning, slightly burnt but made with effort, and sometimes just sitting in silence, with her eyes closed, breathing in rhythm. He began bringing her books he'd never read, asking for her thoughts. In return, she offered him poetry essays, even a dog-eared sci-fi novella she'd loved as a teenager. They debated characters and endings, laughed over terrible dialogue, and discovered mutual disdain for love triangles that lacked emotional payoff. But it wasn't just about the books. It was about how they listened, how Ethan stopped interrupting his own thoughts to make room for hers, how Amara softened her defenses, allowing space for someone new to understand her past. One afternoon, curled up under a blanket, she caught him watching her not with intensity, but with a kind of quiet awe, as if he couldn't believe she was still there. Why do you look at me like that? She asked, teasing. He hesitated, then said, because I don't want to blink and realize you were a dream. She looked away, but not fast enough to hide her smile. You're not dreaming, she whispered. That night, as rain tapped gently against the glass, Amara placed a new book on the coffee table. What's this one? Ethan asked. Something different, she replied. I wrote it. He stared at her, stunned. You write? Always have. This one's not finished, but it's mine. Would you want to read it with me? He reached for the manuscript with both hands as if it were breakable. I'd be honored. And as he opened the first page, Amara leaned into the couch beside him, not quite touching, but close enough for their shoulders to breathe the same air. In a penthouse once ruled by silence, stories had become a lifeline. And in those shared stories, two people were learning how to be seen fully vulnerably without contracts or conditions. It started with thunder. Not the distant kind that grumbles politely over the horizon, but the kind that crashes overhead like it means to split the sky open. The first rumble hit just as Ethan and Amara were finishing dinner takeout this time, because neither of them had the energy to pretend they could improve on the dumplings from the little spot down the block. They sat by the tall windows watching the dark clouds gather above the city. The first flash of lightning painted their reflections against the glass, two figures side by side, their edges softly blurring together. I've always loved storms, Amara murmured, cradling her cup of tea. Ethan glanced at her. Most people find them scary. She smiled faintly. I think they're honest. No pretending. Just nature throwing a fit and getting it over with. He laughed under his breath. You make it sound poetic. Everything's poetic when you let it be, she said, then added especially the chaos. Another thunderclap shook the windows. The lights flickered. Ethan stood. Hold on, let me check the fuse box. But before he took a step, the lights went out completely. Darkness flooded the penthouse. Of course, he muttered. Amara's voice was calm, amused. You got candles? I think so. Somewhere, maybe. He moved toward the hallway carefully, hands out in front of him, like a cautious mime. A soft thud and a muffled curse echoed a second later. You okay? She called. Graceful as ever, he replied. Stub my ego. She laughed, the sound warm and clear even in the dark. Minutes later, the apartment glowed with the golden flicker of candles, 4 in total, balanced on saucers and window ledges. The dim light made the space look softer, less sterile, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. Amara settled onto the couch and tucked her feet beneath her. Ethan joined her, holding the last candle like a torch before setting it on the coffee table. You'd survive in the apocalypse, she said, impressed. He chuckled, barely, but I'd make it look expensive. Lightning lit the sky again, illuminating their faces in sharp contrast. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them changed, not heavy, but charged, like the storm outside had crept in and settled on the floor between them. Amara looked away, first her gaze falling to the notebook in her lap. She'd been scribbling ideas earlier, mapping out scenes from the novel she'd shared. Now the pen rested motionless between her fingers. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Ethan nodded. "Anything. Do you remember your first heartbreak?" He stilled, surprised by the question. Then slowly he leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said. She waited. "It wasn't romantic," he added. "At least not in the traditional sense. I was 17. I built this music app, raw, messy, but it worked. My father found it, deleted the entire project, and said it was a distraction. He told me dreams were for people who didn't understand responsibility." Amara's eyes softened. "That's cruel. It wasn't meant to be. In his mind, he was protecting the family name, teaching me discipline. But that moment gutted me. I stopped writing music that day, stopped dreaming anything too big or too soft, just built walls instead." Her voice was quiet. "And now?" Ethan looked at her, and his answer came without hesitation. "Now, I want to write again, but not alone." A beat of silence passed between them. Then Amara spoke. "My first heartbreak was my mother," she said. "Not her fault. Cancer isn't a betrayal, but watching the strongest person I know fade in front of me, that kind of grief reshapes you, makes you want to build something beautiful before the clock runs out." Ethan swallowed. "That's why you said yes." She nodded. "I wanted something to matter, not just for me, for her, for the story I'll leave behind." He reached for her hand without thinking this time, and she let him. Their fingers intertwined, gentle but firm, steady. Outside, the wind howled. Rain pelted the windows like tiny fists, but inside the room felt cocooned in something softer, braver. Then quietly, almost without meaning to, Amara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. Neither of them moved. He could feel her breath slow and steady near his collarbone, the warmth of her body beside his, the rhythm of her presence grounding him in a way that nothing ever had. "I didn't expect you to be this kind," she whispered. He exhaled a shaky breath. "I didn't expect you to see me at all." The storm reached its peak, thunder cracking so loud it shook a painting on the far wall. But neither of them flinched. They were still, together. The candles flickered. Shadows danced across their faces. And in that moment, Ethan realized something terrifying and true. He was falling for her. Not because she was here, not because she was beautiful or smart or endlessly patient, but because she made him feel real, whole, seen. And he had no idea what to do with that. When the lights finally flickered back on an hour later, Amara was asleep, her head still resting against his shoulder. Ethan didn't move, not even to celebrate the electricity. Because for the first time in his life, the power he felt had nothing to do with money or legacy or expectations. It was this: a storm outside, a spark inside, and someone worth holding through both. The next week passed like a dream wrapped in the softest cotton light. Mornings, slow evenings, unhurried laughter, and warm silences. Amara had officially moved her things into the guest room, though her presence had long since claimed space in every part of Ethan's life. She started organizing his bookshelf alphabetically, then emotionally. He didn't mind. He even found himself missing her commentary when she left the apartment to pick up new art supplies or attend a workshop downtown. For a man who had once prized solitude like currency, Ethan was beginning to hoard her company instead. So when the doorbell rang one lazy Thursday afternoon, and a tall, sharply dressed woman with glossy lipstick stepped into his penthouse carrying a tub of pistachio ice cream, Ethan knew immediately. This was not going to be a quiet day. "Sasha," he said warily. She breezed past him with the familiarity of someone who didn't wait to be invited. "You're welcome," she sang, setting the ice cream on his counter. "Imported, organic, limited batch. You still like pistachio, don't you?" "I haven't eaten that since grad school," he replied. "Well, good. Now we can share." Ethan sighed. "Why are you here?" Sasha turned, smiled sweetly, and perched herself on one of the bar stools. "I was in the area, decided to check on my favorite recluse." He didn't answer. She pouted. "Oh, come on, Ethan. You used to at least pretend to enjoy my company." "I didn't say I didn't," he replied. "I'm just wondering why it comes with frozen bribes." Before she could answer, Amara walked into the room, her hair damp from a shower, wearing a worn t-shirt and leggings, barefoot, completely unaware of the shift in energy. She stopped when she saw Sasha. Their eyes locked. Amara glanced at Ethan. "Hi," she said slowly, offering a polite nod. Sasha's smile grew sharp. Well, well. So this is the mysterious house guest your mother was whispering about at the gala. Amara didn't flinch. I'm Amara. Sasha, old friend. She turned pointedly to Ethan, or should I say former plus one. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. We've known each other a long time, he said to Amara, careful not to give Sasha the satisfaction of tension. Sasha was part of my life during a very different time. Different indeed, Sasha added. He used to wear suits to breakfast. Amara smiled. Well, he wears socks now. That's already progress. Sasha blinked. Ethan coughed to cover a laugh. For a beat, the tension held. Then Amara walked over to the freezer, opened it, and pulled out 2 spoons. Ice cream's melting, she said. Might as well eat it. She scooped herself a spoonful and leaned against the counter beside Ethan. Sasha looked between them, eyes narrowing. You seem very at home, she said finally. Amara didn't take the bait. It's a nice place, cozy. Sasha turned her gaze on Ethan. So, is this serious or is it just one of your experiments again? Before Ethan could answer, Amara straightened. I'm sorry, she said calmly, but I don't think you get to categorize me. I'm not a test run or a placeholder. I'm a person. And if you're here to measure territory, I suggest you draw your map elsewhere. Sasha's expression faltered. Ethan stepped in gently, Amara, but she held up a hand. It's fine, really. She walked toward the balcony and disappeared through the glass door, leaving the room colder despite the melting dessert on the counter. Sasha's tone changed immediately. I didn't mean to upset her. Yes, you did, Ethan said flatly. She blinked. Excuse me. You came here to test boundaries, stir things. Remind me of who I used to be. I miss who you used to be. I don't. The words stunned even him. Sasha rose, stung pride bleeding through her poise. Fine, I'll go. Take the ice cream, he said. I brought it for you. I don't want it. She stared at him, but he didn't look away. Finally, she grabbed the container, turned on her heel, and left without another word. The silence that followed was thick. Ethan stood still for a moment, then walked toward the balcony. Through the glass, he saw Amara leaning on the railing, her face unreadable against the city lights. He opened the door quietly. She didn't turn. She was testing you, Amara said. I know. And part of you wanted to pass. He stepped beside her. Only the part of me that used to need approval? I don't live there anymore. She glanced at him. Really? I live here now, he said. With a woman who calls out nonsense, shares books in the bathtub, and turns my apartment into a human place. She looked down. That was hard for me. I know. I didn't expect to feel territorial. He smiled. I didn't expect you to care. She gave him a sideways look. Don't be dense. They stood in silence, the storm of earlier now, just memory. I didn't like the way she looked at you, Amara admitted. I didn't like the way she looked at you. They turned at the same time and suddenly they were closer than expected, faces inches apart. Amara swallowed. We're still just figuring this out. I know, Ethan said softly, but I want to keep figuring it out with you. Her eyes searched his. Then she leaned in slowly, gently, and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was quiet and tentative, like a question asked with lips instead of words. He answered with his hands at her waist, grounding her. When they pulled apart, her breath caught. Okay, she whispered. That's definitely not just a contract. No, he said, voice hoarse. It's not. They stood there a while longer, watching the city glow. Inside, the ice cream was melting, forgotten. But outside, something far sweeter had begun to take shape. That evening, neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. There was a softness in the air that words would only wrinkle, a silence that buzzed not with tension, but with understanding. Dinner was simple. Pasta with too much garlic, which they both agreed was worth it. Amara filled the room with quiet jazz again, and Ethan refilled their wine glasses without asking. They moved around each other like they'd been practicing this dance for months, not days. Each touch, each accidental graze of fingers, sent new ripples through waters they hadn't dared wade into before. By the time midnight came, the city was hushed beneath a blanket of velvet sky. The lights from the windows cast long, golden trails across the apartment floor. Amara stood by the living room window, hugging a throw around her shoulders, watching a cab idle below. Do you think, she asked softly, we're getting ahead of ourselves? Ethan looked up from the couch where her manuscript still lay open in his lap. Ahead of what? Of who we're supposed to be. He rose, careful, thoughtful, and walked toward her until he was standing just beside her, not touching but close enough that their shadows blended. I think he said that life doesn't give you many moments where time slows down and says, here's a person you can exhale with. So if it feels ahead, maybe it's just because it's right. She turned to look at him. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes were soft. I want to believe that. Then believe it. They stayed their faces inches apart, breath shared. The only sound was the soft hum of traffic below and the jazz still floating in the background like smoke. Amara set her wineglass down on the windowsill and whispered, I'm scared. He didn't flinch. Of what? Of being wanted, she said only for the novelty. For being the girl who changed you. The one who wandered in, rearranged a few shelves, then got replaced when life got busy again. His throat tightened. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. You weren't the novelty, Amara. You were the mirror, the one that made me see myself clearly for the first time. She searched his face, looking for cracks, but found only sincerity. Still, she didn't move. Not yet. I've never done this without armor, she admitted. Never let someone in without an exit plan. He brushed a thumb across the back of her hand. Then let's not make this perfect. Let's just make it honest. That was when she stepped forward. Her arms found his waist, his found her shoulders, and they stood there in an embrace that wasn't just romantic, it was earned. Built from quiet days and shared pages, from storms and awkward meals, from books and bruised trust. Ethan bent slightly to rest his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. I wasn't planning to leave. They moved together without pressure, walking to the bedroom like two people who didn't need to explain what was unfolding. There were no dramatic gasps, no clumsy declarations, just breath and fingers, skin and patience. Ethan lit a single candle on the dresser, enough to keep the shadows soft. The room felt like a secret. He helped her out of her cardigan. She helped him out of his uncertainty. They kissed slowly, reverently. They paused often, checking each other's eyes, reading every unspoken sentence between the lines of breath. When she pulled his shirt over his head, he didn't hide. When she let her robe fall open, he didn't stare. He absorbed her like a truth finally spoken. They made love like people who had known absence. Not just of touch, but of being understood. There was nothing rushed, nothing rehearsed, no pretending, just presence. And when they lay tangled in the aftermath, Ethan on his back, Amara resting with her head on his chest, it wasn't about possession or performance. It was about arrival. Home not as a place, but as a person. Still scared, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A little, she said, but it's a good kind, like standing at the edge of something beautiful. He kissed her forehead. Then let's jump, together. She smiled into his skin. You talk like a writer. Maybe I've been living with one too long. You're not tired of me yet. He turned his head toward her, brushing her cheek. I'm afraid of how much I'm not. The candle flickered, then steadied. Outside, the city kept moving, but in that room, time bowed its head and let them be. That night wasn't the climax of a romance, it was the opening of a door. A promise made not in grand speeches, but in the quiet language of presence. No fireworks, just hands, just hearts, and just enough courage to meet in the middle. The morning after their first night together arrived with golden sunlight and the scent of fresh coffee. Ethan woke first, not because of an alarm, but because of peace, a feeling so unfamiliar it startled him. Amara was still asleep, curled up beside him, one hand resting lightly on his chest, her breathing slow and steady. He didn't move. He didn't want to disturb the stillness. For once, he wasn't rushing to fix, plan, or prepare. He was simply there, present and human. But peace, as he was learning, was a fragile thing. By noon, the penthouse phone rang, a line that almost never buzzed unless it was someone important or someone old-fashioned. In this case, it was both. Ethan, darling, came the voice of Sylvia James, his mother, crisp, elegant, and without hesitation. Mother, he replied, already tightening. We're coming by in 30 minutes, your father insists. Coming by. Yes. Don't panic. I've already arranged for lunch to be delivered. Keep the table clear. She hung up before he could protest. Ethan stared at the receiver, then at the door to the bedroom where Amara was now stretching in one of his button-down shirts, her hair still wild from sleep, her smile soft and unaware. His stomach dropped. 30 minutes. He didn't want her to meet them like this, half-dressed and unguarded, their intimacy still fresh. But he also didn't want to hide her. Couldn't. He walked to the doorway. Hey, he said gently, we have guests coming. Amara blinked. Okay, who? My parents. She froze. Now. She studied his face. Do you want me to stay? I want you to exist, he said. In this space, with me. They'll have to deal with that. Amara exhaled slowly. Then I'll get dressed. 25 minutes later, the penthouse smelled like rosemary and lemon, the catered lunch immaculate on glass platters. Amara wore a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, no makeup, but grace. Ethan wore his discomfort like a wrinkle in his collar. The elevator dinged. And then Sylvia and Harold James stepped inside every inch the image of generational wealth and poised expectation. Sylvia was in pearls, Harold in a tailored suit that looked like it cost more than most cars. Their eyes landed on Amara immediately. Sylvia's smile was polite, sharp. "You must be the guest I've heard so little about." Amara extended her hand. "Amara, it's nice to meet you." Harold shook her hand briefly. Sylvia did not. "We didn't know Ethan had company," she said, glancing meaningfully at the spread. "How lovely." Amara smiled coolly. He didn't know either. It was a surprise. Ethan stepped in. "Let's eat before it gets cold." Lunch was civilized, which was to say tense beneath a lacquer of manners. Sylvia asked about Amara's work, subtly emphasizing freelance like it was synonymous with aimless. Harold said little except to remind Ethan of the upcoming board meeting for the foundation. The turning point came with dessert, tiny lemon tarts that looked prettier than they tasted. Sylvia set down her fork with surgical precision. "Ethan," she said, "may I speak with you alone?" Amara's expression didn't change, but Ethan could feel the shift beside him. He stood slowly. "Of course." They moved to the study. Sylvia closed the door gently and then turned. "Who is she?" "You just met her." "Don't be clever. Who is she to you?" Ethan leaned against the desk. "She's someone I care about." "Is she the reason you've canceled meetings, ignored invitations, avoided the last 3 family dinners?" "I've been living differently." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. "You've been hiding." "I've been healing." She tilted her head. "From what?" "From the life you raised me to think was the only version of success." Sylvia's voice lowered. "You're speaking like a man under influence." "I am. Her influence. And it's the most grounded I've felt in years." Sylvia folded her arms. "She's not one of us." Ethan straightened. "That's exactly why I need her. Do you think your father and I went through all we did so you could fall for someone who doesn't even understand the world you belong to?" He stared at her. "Maybe I don't want to belong to that world anymore." She went silent for a moment, then said quietly, "You're still on the foundation's will, Ethan. And you know what happens if you abandon the expectations attached to it." He didn't flinch. "She's not for now," Sylvia added. "She's not forever. Don't confuse comfort with commitment. You're confusing legacy with love." Silence. Then Sylvia turned for the door. "I hope you'll think this through." When Ethan returned to the living room, Harold was telling Amara about the family's estate in Maine. She was listening politely, but the moment she saw Ethan's face, she stood. "They said their goodbyes," he said. "We don't have to see them out." The elevator doors closed behind his parents. Amara exhaled. "That felt like an interview I didn't apply for." "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be." But she was quiet as she walked to the window looking out at the city below. Ethan joined her. "I told them the truth." She didn't look at him, which is, "that I care about you, that I want a life with you in it." Her voice was almost a whisper, "even if it costs you everything." He stepped beside her, his reflection now aligned with hers in the glass. "Some things are worth losing to finally live." She turned then, really looked at him. "I'm not going to disappear, Ethan. But I won't shrink to fit into their boxes either. I would never ask you to." "I know," she said. "That's what scares them." Outside, the sky turned overcast. Inside, a storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in the corners. They stood there in silence side by side, not shaken, not broken, but aware now of the war ahead, and more certain than ever of who they were choosing to fight it with. For 3 days, Ethan didn't see Amara, not because he didn't want to, because she left, not with drama or shouting or tears, just a note on his nightstand scribbled in quick handwriting, as though she hadn't allowed herself time to second guess. "Ethan, I need to breathe without holding my shoulders tight. I'll be back. Maybe. Don't chase me. A." At first he thought it was a joke, a momentary flare of independence. Maybe she'd gone for a walk, or to the market she liked downtown. But by noon her closet was half empty. By evening her books were gone. By morning her toothbrush had vanished too. And so had she. Ethan stared at the note until the words burned into his mind. Then he folded it once neatly and placed it inside his wallet right behind his ID, as if to remind himself of who he was without her. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't send a driver to track her down. He honored the last line, "Don't chase me." But it hurt. The silence stretched long and jagged. He moved through his days like a man underwater, meetings, blurred emails, unread conversations, reduced to nods and half smiles. The penthouse was too big again, too sterile. The echoes had returned. On the 4th morning, he found himself standing in the kitchen, staring at the mug she always used, the chipped one, with the hand-painted cherry blossoms she'd picked up from a flea market. It was still in the drying rack, like it hadn't realized she was gone. He made tea anyway, poured it into her mug, didn't drink it, just sat across from the empty chair and waited for a ghost. He thought about her laugh, how it started in her shoulders before it ever touched her mouth. He thought about her underlining lines in novels with that orange pen and muttering rude when the author killed off a character too soon. He thought about the way she danced barefoot in his hallway when she thought no one was looking, headphones in head, tilted toward the ceiling like it was made of stars. He thought about all of it and wondered how he'd let her slip away. The answer, of course, was obvious. Fear. Not his. Hers. She had run because she believed the weight of his world, the judgment, the legacy, the pressure was still stronger than his feelings for her. And maybe in the silence after his parents left, he'd allowed that doubt to settle between them. Maybe he hadn't said enough. Maybe he hadn't said anything. By day 6, the ache had matured into something sharper resolve. He wouldn't chase her, but he would tell the truth. Not with flowers, not with grand gestures, but with clarity. So he sat down at his piano, the one she'd convinced him to unearth from storage, the one he hadn't touched in a decade. He opened the lid, ran his fingers over the keys, and played. It was clumsy at first, like trying to speak a language forgotten in childhood. But the melody came, hesitant then steadier, a series of notes that spoke what words couldn't. He recorded it, one take, no edits. Then he opened his phone, clicked on her contact, and attached the file with a message that read, "If music is memory, this one belongs to you." Then he put his phone down and waited. An hour passed. 2. Nothing. He told himself not to spiral. He failed. That night he left the penthouse and walked without direction, hood up, hands in pockets, face turned down. The city felt colder, or maybe he'd just lost his heat. He ended up in front of the small bookstore where they'd gone together the week she'd moved in. The same one where she'd laughed at a sign that read, "We don't sell coffee, but we sell everything else you need to feel alive." The lights inside were off. Closed. Of course. He sat on the stoop anyway. Minutes passed, then an hour, and then a car pulled up. Not a taxi, not an Uber. A silver hatchback, paint chipped, one headlight slightly fogged. Familiar. His heart stuttered. The door opened, and there she was. No makeup, no fanfare, just a soft blue sweater and jeans, hair tucked under a scarf, eyes unreadable. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. Finally, she said, "You played." He nodded. "It wasn't perfect," she added. "I wasn't trying to be." She stepped forward. "I listened to it twice," she whispered. "And I cried the second time." He smiled. "Only the second. I didn't want to give you the satisfaction the first time." He laughed, breath-catching. She looked at him, voice softer now. "I left because I thought I was too much for your world. Too loud, too messy, too unpolished. I don't want polished. I know that now." He stepped closer. "You were never too much. If anything, you made the world finally feel like mine." She hesitated. "I'm still scared." "Me too. But I came back." I noticed. They stood inches apart, the air between them electric. Then slowly, Amara reached into her bag and pulled something out. A photograph. Worn edges, sun-faded. It was the two of them on the couch weeks earlier. She must have snapped it without him knowing. He was reading, and she was mid-laugh, head thrown back, one hand reaching for his. "I left it behind on purpose," she said, "just in case I got too stubborn to remember why I fell." He took it carefully like it was glass. "I framed it," he said, "the second I found it." She smiled. "Come home," he said. She didn't answer with words. She stepped into his arms, and everything they had lost in 6 days returned in a heartbeat. The following week unfolded with new texture, one neither of them had fully known before. It was soft but purposeful, like walking through fog toward a lighthouse you know is real, even if you can't yet see the shoreline. Amara moved back in officially, though neither of them used that word. Her books reappeared on shelves. Her robe was draped casually over the back of the reading chair. A new toothbrush, red this time, sat beside his in the bathroom. They were not declaring anything, but they were living something together. And then without warning came the knock. Not on the door, on the past. It arrived in the form of a small brown envelope left at the concierge desk. No return address. No markings except Ethan's name in his father's handwriting, sharp, elegant, deliberate. He stared at it for a moment before taking it upstairs. Amara noticed the envelope immediately but didn't ask. She simply placed a cup of tea on the table beside him and returned to editing her manuscript as if silently saying, "You can choose when to let me in." He opened it 2 hours later. Inside were three things: a deed transfer document for a small property in the Catskills, a check unsigned, unendorsed for $10 million, and a note written on ivory stationery. Ethan Timpinto, your mother and I may never understand the choices you've made, but we no longer wish to control them. The house is yours. Your grandfather built it with his hands. He used it to disappear when the weight of the family name grew too loud. Maybe you'll find something quieter there. The check is not a bribe. It's what you were always owed, now released without expectation. We're stepping aside, not because we approve, but because we finally recognize that love, real love, cannot be architected by legacy. If you choose to come home someday, the door won't be locked. Ikesham. It was the closest thing Harold James had ever written to an apology. Ethan read it twice, then placed it on the table and exhaled like a man cracking the seal on a decades-old vault. Amara looked up. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "It's a letter I never expected, and yet it says exactly what I needed." She leaned forward. "Do you believe them?" "I don't know, but for once I believe myself." That night they stood on the balcony's city lights, winking at them below wind-lifting strands of her hair across her face. He tucked them behind her ear with gentle fingers. "You ever think about leaving the city?" he asked. She smiled. "Only every Monday morning." He chuckled. "There's a place up north, quiet, mountains. A porch built for sunrise tea." She studied him. "You're not proposing we run away, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm asking if we can start somewhere new on our terms." She nodded slowly. "Let's visit." They drove up 2 days later. The Catskills in spring were lush and soft around the edges. The house was old but sturdy stone and wood and thick windowsills. It smelled like cedar and thyme. Dust floated in the sunlight like memories waiting to be named. They spent 2 days cleaning, 2 more walking trails, discovering wildflowers, and cooking together in a kitchen with squeaky cabinets and a sink that only ran cold. On the fifth night, he found her standing barefoot in the garden, looking at the stars. "They're clearer here," she said. He stepped beside her. "Or maybe we just finally stopped squinting." She looked at him. "You seem lighter." "I am." She took his hand. "It's scary to be happy, isn't it?" "Terrifying, but worth it." He squeezed her fingers, every minute. Back in the city, their return was quiet but deliberate. Ethan walked into his family's next foundation board meeting, not with a suit and rehearsed speech, but with Amara at his side, hand in hand. No announcements, just presence. There were whispers, of course, but none of them mattered. Afterwards, Sylvia approached him in the hallway. Her heels clicked with hesitation. "She's lovely," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. "She always was." Sylvia nodded once. "I still don't understand, but I see that you're whole." He offered a small smile. "That's enough for me." She paused. "Your father wanted to come. He's not ready, but he will be." "I'm not waiting." "I know," she said. Then quietly, "Thank you for not shutting the door." When she walked away, Ethan exhaled. Amara, waiting at the end of the corridor, raised an eyebrow. "Well," she asked. He grinned. "Let's just say I've never enjoyed silence more." They left the building laughing, their steps matching without effort. In the days that followed, Ethan played the piano again often. Amara painted in the mornings, always with the windows open. They started hosting friends, cooking too much, staying up too late, and arguing over which version of Pride and Prejudice was superior. One evening, they sat curled on the couch, rain tapping against the windows, when Amara looked at him suddenly and said, "You think love is a destination or a direction?" He considered a direction. "Otherwise, we'd all stop walking after the first, 'I love you.'" She smiled. "I'm glad we're walking the same way." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Let's never stop." Spring gave way to early summer, and the Catskills house slowly transformed from a retreat to a home. They didn't plan it that way, but it happened in the way sunlight gradually bleaches the edges of old furniture, in the way 2 toothbrushes become 3, and a weekend bag becomes a drawer then a life. The house breathed with them now. Laughter in the kitchen, arguments over seasoning, paint smudges on windowsills, dried flowers hanging above the entryway. Amara's books were everywhere, spilling out of shelves, stacked under chairs, marking trails through rooms like breadcrumbs of thought. Ethan, once tethered to concrete glass, and approval found a new rhythm in the silence. He began writing again. Not for a publisher, not for the board, just for himself. Notes scribbled on napkins, paragraphs on receipts, Love letters never sent because they were already received in the way he looked at her. They woke early, not to beat time, but to greet it. Tea on the porch. No phones. Just morning and breath. It was a Wednesday when it happened. No ceremony, no fireworks. Just Ethan standing in the garden, dirt on his palms from planting lavender, calling out, "Hey, Amara." She poked her head out the window. Yeah. He held up a small wooden box, one she had once admired in a flea market stall, its hinges old and stubborn. Inside a ring. No diamonds, just brushed gold warm like sunset shaped like a circle drawn by hand. "I know you're not into grand gestures," he said, voice calm, "so I won't get down on one knee. I won't even ask if you'll marry me." She raised an eyebrow. "You're really bad at this." "I know," he said, grinning, "but I will ask if you'll choose this me-us, this life again and again. Not once in a ceremony, but every morning. Will you keep choosing it?" She stepped outside barefoot, crossing the garden slowly. "I already do," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit not just in size, but in story. They didn't celebrate with champagne. They made soup. They called two friends. They danced on the porch while a thunderstorm rolled in. The next few months passed, like pages in a novel they'd forgotten they were writing, chapters filled with things both quiet and profound. One of Amara's short stories was picked up by a small but beloved literary magazine. She didn't scream when she got the email. She just showed it to Ethan and cried into his shoulder. Ethan declined a board seat at a high-profile tech firm. Instead, he accepted a part-time position teaching creative ethics at a community college upstate. He told Amara it felt like pruning a tree to make space for real fruit. They visited the city, occasionally staying in hotels, walking streets they once owned, but no longer needed to conquer. They met Ethan's parents for lunch once every few months. It was civil, sometimes even warm. Sylvia learned to ask questions instead of making assumptions. Harold learned to listen. But none of that defined their happiness. What did was this. One morning, Ethan woke to the smell of ginger and honey. Amara was humming in the kitchen. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and found her standing at the counter, stirring something in a small pot, a piece of paper in her hand. "What's that?" he asked. She looked up, eyes brighter than sunlight. "I think we should adopt," she said, voice clear. He blinked. "Now, not this second," she laughed. "But soon. I've been thinking, this home has room. My heart has room. And I want to give someone the kind of safety we found here." He walked to her, pressed a kiss to her temple, and said, "Okay." That afternoon, they sat at the kitchen table, filling out forms, not out of obligation or to complete a picture, but because they believed love was something meant to be shared. They would go on to adopt a boy with the same quiet eyes Ethan once had, then a girl who sang to herself in the dark. Years later, a teenager who painted stories in color and refused to speak until she did. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Years passed. The garden grew. The porch creaked more. The house gained laugh lines in its floors, and they called them blessings. On their 15th anniversary, Ethan asked Amara if she remembered the moment she almost left for good. "I did leave," she said, "but you left the door open." He nodded. "I'm still holding it, just in case." She took his hand. "No," she whispered. "Now we're building the door together." They sat in silence then, not because there was nothing to say, but because some futures are so full they speak without sound.